So, my first story is from China. It's about a fairy tale. A fairy tale on a peacock. Now, in China, there is a fairy, a peacock fairy. She has the head and the tail of a peacock, but the body, well, the body is a little bit, the arms and torso, but the rest of her is all peacock. You believe that?
Yeah,
Wow.
if you say so.
Okay, so every year the peacock fairy would get together with all of the peacocks and select one peacock as her representative, as her apprentice. So she gathered all the peacocks together, and as she gathered them together, she looked around her, all these beautiful peacocks with their feathers all spread out so prettily, and she looked at them and thought, oh, how do I choose one? And then she had an idea. She had this idea that they would be given until midnight of that day to make themselves look different. Make yourselves look different than all the other peacocks. Show me, said the fairy, what makes you different than everybody else. And so all the peacocks rushed off to make themselves as beautiful as they could. Well, one little peacock, smaller than the others, maybe his tail was not as grand as theirs. He just decided he didn't have a chance. And so he left and walked off on his own, taking in on the land. He figured he'd go back at midnight to see who was the new apprentice. But in the meantime, he was just going to see what the land around there was like. He first came upon an old man sitting in the shade who had been working very hard, maybe harder than he should have worked, and he was sweating and very hot. The peacock pulled off some of his feathers and gave them to the man to use as a fan. Next, he went and he found a young girl crying and crying by the side of the road. And he asked her what was wrong, what was the matter. And she looked at him and said, oh, I've been invited to the big dance, and I have nothing to wear and nothing to decorate myself. So the little peacock, pulled off more of his feathers and gave them to her so that she could use them on her dress and in her hair. And so the day went on like this until the peacock actually pulled off all of his tail feathers. He had none left. Then he came to the house of a little boy. He heard crying of a little boy, and so he walked up to the house to see if he could help. The little boy was not feeling well. His mother did not want him to go and see fireworks that night. But the little boy was saying to his mother, if I could only see the fireworks, I might feel better. Can't I please go? And she said, no, the fireworks aren't even started yet. They won't start until it gets dark outside. And that's much too late for you to be outside. So the little boy just cried. The little peacock looked sadly where his feathers used to be. If only I hadn't given all my feathers away, I could have spread them for the little boy, and maybe he would have thought they were maybe as good as fireworks. But he had none. And so sadly he left the little boy and walked back, eventually returning to the gathering of other peacocks in front of the peacock fairy. And what a gathering it was. Some peacocks had actually tied fireflies into their tails. Others had woven flowers into their tails. They were all beautiful and gorgeous and resplendent. And there was the little peacock, no feathers on his tail at all. And so the peacock fairy, looking around her, was just struck by how beautiful all the peacocks were. But you want to know which peacock looked really different than all the others? Yeah, you guessed it if you guessed the little peacock who had no tail at all. She asked him, she said, "You're really different. You have no tail at all. What happened to your feathers?" And so he told her that he had given his feathers away, first to an old man to use as a fan, then to a girl who was crying because she had no dress for the ball. And then he said what made him saddest was the little boy who wanted to go to the fireworks. And by the time he found the little boy, he had no feathers on his tail. He didn't know how to help the little boy, and that made him very, very sad. So maybe whoever she picked as apprentice, they could help the little boy, and help him see something fancy like fireworks. Well, that was all the peacock fairy needed to hear. She said, "I have found my apprentice, little peacock, and my apprentice for the next year is going to be you." Everyone was astonished, but that was the peacock fairy's choice. She waved her hands, and the largest feather from each of the grand big peacocks rose into the air and became a large tail and landed on the little peacock, so that the little peacock now had a large grand tail, all of his own. Then the peacock fairy whispered in his ear a spell that he could use, a spell that would actually make his feathers put out a pattern that looked like a kaleidoscope and spun with fire. He had a fiery tail, and with that tail, with that magic spell, he lifted into the air and flew over the village, making sure he flew right by that little boy's window. The little boy looked out the window and cried to his mother, "Look, see, I see fireworks. Mama, I see fireworks, and I feel better already." And that was when the littlest peacock with no tail feather at all became the apprentice of the peacock fairy. So that's my first story.
That's a great story, Cece.
Well, thank you. It came from Rhinos and Raspberries, and you can look that up in the book.